So, welcome to the presentation about accessibility in service design and museums. We want to start by showing you this cool exhibit. What do you think about it? Oh, it's a little bit hard to see. Maybe we can read the text that comes with it. Okay, not so, as you can see, museums are not always there to support all the people with all the disabilities, and sometimes it could be quite annoying to come to a museum or to visit some kind of exhibition and not be able to understand or enjoy some of the information because of your disability. So we're here to hopefully help you solve it.
Yeah, so to start, I will give you some base information on numbers and facts regarding accessibility and disability studies in general. So when we talk about disabilities, we are not talking about a personal health condition, but rather we are talking about the mismatch of human interaction, as seen on the example of the staircase. And even though people with disabilities are a minority with around like 15 to 25% of Germans being affected, we all are disabled at least sometimes. And this can be made very clear by the example of deafness. So disabilities are categorized in 3 different states: permanent disabilities, temporary and situational disabilities. And a person that is deaf, for example, is permanently disabled. But if you have an ear infection, you are also disabled, but just for a set amount of time. But I bet we are all disabled at some point in our lives. For example, when there's a very loud construction site, nobody can hear the Deutsche Bahn announcements of trains being delayed or cancelled. So that's a situation where all of us are disabled and we're all profiting of accessible design. And there are also some word definitions I'd like you to know so that we're all on the same level of understanding. Ableism refers to bias, prejudice, and discrimination against people with disability, and it hinges the idea that people with disabilities are less valuable than non-disabled persons. There are 3 types of ableism. Institutional ableism, which we are talking about mostly, means the execution of people with disabilities from society through the definite neglect of accessible thinking. Next to this kind, there's also interpersonal and internalized ableism. For example, others making fun of people with disabilities, at interpersonal ableism, and affected people themselves thinking less of them because of disabilities, which is internalized ableism. And there are, however, specific things we can do to help this problem, which I will just quickly go through with you. So to help, you could learn about, or you should, I should say, learn about disabilities, what it means and how it affects people. Learn about ableism, ableist stereotypes, and the history of disability rights activism. You should listen to people with disabilities and share their experience, challenge ableism as it happens, give people with disabilities a platform instead of speaking for them, advocate for accessibility and exclusivity, and enact policies or laws that encounter ableism. And there are, of course, also aspects of what you can do. If you just go one next. There's allyship, and this is a very simple way to challenge ableism. Allyship is an active, consistent, and strenuous practice of unlearning and re-evaluating, in which a person in a position of privilege and power seeks to act in solidarity with marginalized groups. It's very important to know that allyship is not an identity. It's a lifelong process of building relationships based on trust, consistency, and accountability with marginalized individuals and groups. You should adopt the terms and terminology of the community, support planned protests and demos, amplify messages without selling the accomplishments behind them as your own, recommend people from the community and fill key positions with them, and positively enlighten their skills in crucial situations. What you really should avoid doing is get defensive. So avoid justifications and acknowledge your privilege and the benefit that comes with them. You shouldn't minimize. So if others tell you about their experiences of discrimination, take them seriously. And do not relativize. So let the experiences stand for themselves instead of drawing comparison and putting them into perspective.
Okay, so now you learned through a few key guidelines. I want to show you this image and think a second, what is wrong with this quite stereotypical explanation of a text exhibit in a museum. Yeah, so there's like too much text. The text is too complicated. Most of people won't understand this like kind of artsy language. It might be too small for some people. There's no audio options or even like braille text. And I want to show you some people that do it in a right way. So this studio, it's called Tactile Studio. They're basically inclusive design agency aiming to promote access to art and culture for everyone. Designing educational solution enhanced by sensory experiences, touch, sound, smell, and so. As you can see in this example from the Louvre in Abu Dhabi, they basically minimize the information to few basic sentences that kids and maybe people with cognitive disabilities could understand. They showed it in at least 3 different languages including Braille for blind people. They made small models that show basically the textures, the shapes, and different patterns that you can see in the bigger model. And here as well, they layered out the pictures so blind people could physically feel the photo. Obviously, it's not only for blind people, but for all people with different disabilities, and especially kids that usually get super bored in museums and can actively hands-on feel the exhibit. I'll show you some more examples shortly, but first let's go through some guidelines for more accessible designing. Wait, okay. Yeah, here are some guidelines that written by Alex Hoffmann and Jolanta Paliszewska and Djamal Rokoko. And basically, it's students from the FOP that created this masterwork about accessibility. Here are some guidelines. So content and language, avoid academic language. Always question whether it's the heavy and kind of fancy language is justified, which you can see really often in museums, that the artist or the museums kind of describe the exhibit with like unnecessarily complicated metaphors and explanations. Yeah, simple language. You can translate all text to simple language. Basically, use short sentences, key points, and short sentences. Explaining difficult words if needed. Avoiding abbreviations, which is like shortening words like people or of course, oh my God, what the fuck, stuff like this. Giving context without assuming prior knowledge. And using metaphors, irony, and idioms. Structure can help a lot of people understand the text, especially if it's complicated and it's long. So make contacts. Put labels for trigger warnings, so offer people the freedom of choice. If something in the exhibition or in the text or in a website can trigger someone, please add a label to it before the reading so people don't stumble upon it while they're already in the experience. And tone indications, also label if explain or highlight misleading context that could be maybe problematic for people with cognitive problems or with autism, that sometimes irony or sarcasm comes really difficultly. Typography, it's important to know the font that could help people with dyslexia or cognitive problems. Usually it's the basic free system fonts. Good formatting is also helping. Sans serif works sans serif works better than serif fonts, humanistic and not constructed. Letters such as GAQ, ILL 1 and B8 are could be confusing for some people. Here are some fonts that are the system fonts, basically, that are very easy to read and could help when you creating a text that should be accessible for everyone. There's also this font developed that it's called Open Dyslexic font. It looks kind of goofy, but it was developed to help people with dyslexia and cognitive problems to read easier and better. Although it's still not perfect, and some people say that it's not doing the job always properly. So it's still better to use the system fonts. Yeah, font formatting, large fonts, left aligned. Center could be very confusing when it starts like jumping around and not all the lines begin in the same line. Sufficient line spacing, so you understand when you jump between lines. Short line length, so not longer than 80 characters when it's on the web, and I think it's around 40 when it's on the phone. And put emphasis on important things through semi-bold and basically emphasizing important things. Contrast, enough contrast, and not extreme contrast. Never use too black, like the maximum black and maximum white together. It could hurt the eyes a little bit. Photos and graphics, please provide, when you add photos, please provide alternative text, which is when you have text readers for blind people. There's some tools even automatically on the phone, then it could go through the photo and also read the information on the photo. So people with visual disabilities could also see or know what's on the photo. Put only important information, and when you have photos that are only for only as a background or only for aesthetic purposes, then don't put alt text, so it will skip them. Animation and motions also allow people to skip them or pause them, so they don't start automatically, or allow to disable them at the beginning of the page if some people have some problems like migraines or epilepsy, that they could pause it before they start going into it. Video and audio, add subtitles, transcriptions, audio descriptions, and maybe sign language if possible. Constant volume, no background noises, so everything would be understandable and accessible for everybody. When it comes to museums, there's also we can add extra information like audio or video through QR codes, which could be also problematic for people with visual disabilities, or old people, or maybe people with Parkinson's or other like mobile disabilities. So instead of QR code, you can scan with your phone. There are some technologies like RFID scans like we have on our phones with Apple Pay and stuff. Basically, it's touch-based information gather, and it's way easier than QR codes. Print and paper, matte paper, no bright white glossy paper, sufficient grammage, baseline grid, that everything will be aligned, and not translucent paper, since when you flip it, you can see the text from the other page on the other side and could be confusing. Okay, that was a lot of information. Now let's see how some museums and companies apply it to them. That's an interesting part. So there's this exhibition from studio. It's called the Rodina Studio. There are alternative kind of exhibition studio from the Netherlands. They made this exhibition that basically touches all senses, and you can feel, hear, see, even smell some of the, like most of the stuff. So basically it's a multi-sensory display. You can, as you can see on the photo here, you can touch the painting that appears here. So you can look at it and then you can touch it, and some stuff you can smell. There's here it's written here, you can there are 130 braille labels, so blind people could feel the text, read it through their fingers. Performative design, touch and smell replicas. So basically you don't only watch or look or hear the stuff, you can also smell them, you can touch them, you can feel them with different sensors. Again, another example from the Tactile Studio. That's an exhibit that they made for the Staatliche Museum for Archaeology. And here you can also smell some of the stuff. You can touch all the labels. You can feel things. So it's not only you walk through it and you look at things, but you really hands-on feel the exhibition. And this way it's not only accessible for most people, but also interesting for, let's say, people without disabilities, because it's an experience that is way more interesting than just walking around and looking. Yeah, as a quote from the Tactile Studio, there's no doubt that this experience makes more lasting impressions on the mind than reading a caption on a glass case. One more example, maybe it's not necessarily how museums could be accessible, but rather museums or exhibitions that develop sensitivity and empathy for people with disabilities. So this is exhibitions called Dialogue in the Dark. It exists in Hamburg, I think, or in different places as well. I visited in Israel when I was younger a few times. Basically, it's an exhibition that simulates a day in the life of a blind person. You go inside as a group, there's different situations, everything from walking inside of a market, then in a park, in the city, even being on a boat, just sitting in a living room, being outside, being inside, and everything in pitch black, complete darkness. And you have the sticks to guide you and your guide, but you basically experience the different difficulties that you can experience as a blind person. And I think it also helps you to, in the future, to understand better how the world could be more difficult, or how some stuff that you haven't thought would be difficult are more difficult as a blind person. And yeah, now Lily will tell a little bit about accessibility testing.
Yeah. So when you're working on your own projects, you should keep in mind including accessibility testing from the start. And there are a lot of plugins. If you go one further on the screen, plugins, websites, and apps you can use these days to make accessibility testing really easy and really easy to incorporate. Some of them you might already know. With this tool, for example, you can put all your input, like the distance to the museum that the museum visitor usually stands from, the text, and the lighting in the room. And the tool will automatically tell you the minimum size, for example, in which you should put the text and layout. Just as important to digital testing of accessibility is the active testing with affected people from the start. And every person is individual, and it will not be enough to only test with one affected person, because tokenism is the practice of making only a symbolic effort to be inclusive to members of minority groups by recruiting just enough people from an underrepresented group in order to give the appearance of equality in a workforce. The the consequence is that the token is not seen as an individual, but only as a representative of the category to which they are assigned to. And it means that if they make one mistake, it affects the perception of all people belonging to this group. Yeah. To end on a positive note, however, and show you that accessibility can be really fun and still effective. If you remember the problem from the start that you had, where you couldn't see the exhibit, here's a very interesting example on how you can make your design accessible to people with trouble seeing that I saw last week at the Jewish Museum in Berlin. And it's essentially a topographical version of a painting that was hanging on the wall next to it. But I bet you can come up with a lot more ways to make your experience accessible. And I'm really excited, or we are really excited to see them. And yeah, Ariel.
Yeah, so thank you for watching our presentation. We wanted to leave you with a small mini assignment that you can answer your answers in the comments and underneath this video and income. So think about your latest experience in the real world or in websites, museums, whatever, and write one thing that is accessible and answering the stuff that we just mentioned, and one thing that is not accessible and not answering and excluding some groups of people from it. We're excited to see what you wrote. Thank you very much.